Hey all, this is Ed,
And this is Kara.
and this is your day's dumpster fire. So, how's it going?
Solid. Pretty solid. Getting a little sick, but it's that time of year.
Yeah, I feel like I'm coming down with something too. Like, I got the raspy voice thing going on.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's that time of the year where all of our immune systems get tested to the limits.
They just die.
Well, you're the one who chose to work in a petri dish.
That's true. It's good practice for my Oregon research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, at least it's not elementary school. Like, I got friends of the family who teach elementary school, and the amount of snot and goop that is stuck to them by the end of the day, it's horrifying.
Gross.
Yeah. But then again, though, like these folks, they get sick a lot for their first couple of years of teaching, and then they're immune to everything after that. Like they've literally caught everything under the sun, therefore they
That's
can never
true.
get it again.
That's true. Good point. That's a fair point.
Yeah, just
Fair
get it
point.
all over with now. But yeah. So today's episode it's going to be interesting. Normally we start off with our trash can fire. Well, it's kind of a story that Kara and I are both going to dive into. And it has a lot to do with the last episode, right? When we were talking about the Chicago fire, and how we try to end things with a little sneak peek into what we're working on to next. I had this ingenious idea that I wanted to explore how 24/7 news media has really caused more harm than good, because whether it's conservative or liberal, they take their own spin on things, and they really just alienate and really mess with people's better judgment. And I wanted to really dive into that until Kara and I got lost in a corn maze.
Yeah, there we were in the middle of a corn maze with our significant others. Ed's wife agreed with me on this point.
Even my kids.
Yeah, even the girls, all us ladies were like, this is probably not the best idea, especially right in the middle of election time. So,
So yeah, basically, in most cases in human history, where the guy has this mindset on something, the women have to come in with the common sense and really redirect the thing. So literally, the little trash can fire, as we were walking around this corn maze. Yeah, Kara kind of brought up the fact that, or the notion that, maybe our podcast is a little small, and maybe we should wait until we cover something like that until there's enough revenue to actually pay for a lawyer.
I mean, it's fair. I mean, yeah, we're too little for all that nonsense.
Yeah, all the whining, and I'll be honest with you, I'm very independent. When it comes to politics, I try to understand both sides of the spectrum. I really really enjoy talking to people. I work in trucking, and let me tell you, truck drivers always have an opinion, and truck drivers will give you some of the most incredible theories into what is going on, to the point where one of these days I may even have a truck driver on here who could really explain the truck driver perspective of politics. And yeah, like the one guy, like you and I, Kara, we both know a truck driver who claimed he was abducted by aliens.
Yeah, honestly, I think between you, myself, and my husband, we could have some really wonderful conversations on that topic. We could really fill an episode there. But what are we going to talk about today?
Well, so since you put the kibosh on politics, I figured we would look at the next best thing. So I got a question for you.
Okay.
What fueled the British Industrial Revolution?
Steam or coal? From what I remember from history class in
The
high school.
steamy coal.
Steamy coal. Yeah. Steamy coal.
So yeah, when we look at British history, it actually goes all the way back to the Roman Empire. And I can already tell right now, Carrie, you're like, oh my gosh, what's Ed going into now? So yes, we got to go back thousands of years before Britain was even a glimmer in Winston Churchill's eye. But the Romans, they were digging around in this new land they kind of conquered, and they found this black rock, and it was a very 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 black rock. It was the blackest thing they've ever seen. And these Romans, they would polish this rock up because, yeah, it's cool to have diamonds and rubies and emeralds and all the fun stuff, but they never really had anything that was truly black. And so they would polish these rocks up and give it out as jewelry, like really, really expensive necklaces and bracelets and all that kind of stuff. But that all changed when Rome caught on fire, which that's a future episode. Maybe when all those little black rocks, they caught on fire and they burned really hot and they burned for a long time. And basically it was coal. That's what the Romans found. It was coal. And so when we look at British history, the coal was the thing that produced the heat because, go back to our nuclear power plant episode. They didn't have nuclear technology at that time in the early 1840s. So they relied heavily on coal. And England just so happens to be sitting on a huge, was it a depository? A huge,
I think that's the right word. Yeah.
It's some ository, right? They're sitting on some giant pile of carbonized dinosaurs, one of the largest in the world. And once you start burning coal, first it was used for just warming up a household, but then like the other part of your answer, Kara, steam. So the steam, suddenly when they realized that coal can make a lot of steam and you can, direct steam and all sorts of stuff, you can power a lot of things. And literally overnight, London went from a happy village with a few thousand people in it to like 3/4 of the entire population of England lived in London. And that was like in the 1840s going up into the 1860s. And London literally turned black because of all the coal, the soot and everything. This is where we start getting into Romanticism, right? Like Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge and a whole bunch of other dead poets that...
Don't forget Percy.
What's that?
Don't forget Percy.
Oh, yeah, Percy, Emily Barrett Browning. There's a lot of
a lot of literature that we could throw into here, and then you got to add the American Romanticism movement not long after this, and
which this copied the British.
They did, but we got Edgar Allan Poe out of it, so I'm happy.
Yeah, I literally have a book.
Me too.
Side note, guys, I literally have a book written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. It is an actual printing. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was the author that kind of inspired Mary Shelley to write Frankenstein. Woo! And so I have this book of original poetry from Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And if you open it up and you read where it was published, it claims that Samuel Taylor Coleridge was an American poet, that he was an American literary genius, and it was published in Philadelphia. And it's literally because America ripped off British Romanticism.
They did. But
yeah,
but we got some good stuff out of it. Anyways, go on.
Yeah. So that the side note, useless fact for the day. So a lot of poets, they were writing about how London had really gone to crap, how Sure, it's industrialized. Sure, we've got machines making life easier, and all this fancy technology. But literally, London was black. The photography was around in the 1860s, and if you actually look at some of these very early pictures or photographs of London,
they're really dark.
Yeah, it's very dark, and it's not just because the camera sucked back then. Well, they kind of sucked back then, but it was literally because London was so dark. It was covered in soot.
My asthmatic lungs, just listening to this, can't take it.
Well, that's true. You do have the lungs of a 90-year-old chain smoker.
Yep. Terrible.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, going up a flight of stairs and you're just wheezing away.
Oh, yeah. I'm out of shape, too, so we gotta work on this.
Well, yeah, we gave up working out to create a podcast. So,
fair.
And so, yeah, coal was a thing that really changed England. It changed the world. But there's one other thing that we don't think about in terms of what powered the Industrial Revolution in England. Any thoughts on what that could have been? We've got coal, we've got steam, what else?
I mean, I know the answer because I'm staring at your notes. Can I say it?
Sure, go for it. Surprise us all.
All right, guys, you ready? We're going to talk about bread.
That's right. So, because the women in my life said that talking about politics would be too dangerous, I have decided to dedicate a whole episode to bread.
Let's go.
So, this isn't going to be anywhere nearly as exciting as a Chicago burning down. Definitely not going to be as exciting as the Thanksgiving Day special that I've got coming up, or Kara's like 18-part thing on the Oregon Trail.
Oh, you guys, it's going to be long.
Yeah, it's going to be a doozy. So I'm trying to buy some time here.
Yeah,
and what better topic to buy time with than talking about bread? Yes, I love this stuff.
I'm excited.
Dietitians hate this stuff.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I don't know. My wife makes really good bread. I bought a bread machine.
Okay. I told my husband we were doing bread, and he just looked at me like we were nuts. But he's like, okay.
Yeah. Buckle up, Buttercup. It's going to get exciting over here in the dumpster fire.
Yeah, I was like, I'll tell you what I learned after we're done here.
So the reason why I want to bring this up is because the whole idea behind the podcast is, as you haven't caught on, if you're just now joining us for the first time, the idea behind this podcast is that we take a situation where we try to engineer everything to perfection, and we throw all our technology at it. We throw all our logic and math and science, and we throw all of our human ingenuity into something. And as soon as we implement it, 5 minutes later, it completely falls apart. It blows up. It catches on fire. And so when we look at the Industrial Revolution, when we look at a vast majority of Englanders were moving into London and working in these factories and just these deplorable conditions to make a few pennies a day, we have to look at what fueled the laborers. And when I was doing my research here, I found out that your average worker, so your farmhand, we'll go back to the 1830s, 1840s, your average farmhand would burn through 5,000 to 6,000 calories in a day.
That's so much.
That's literally like that. That's literally eating like 2 to 3 Thanksgiving meals a day.
Oh, how many McDonald's cheeseburgers do you think that would be? Or just
3.
Yeah, something small. Quick
yeah,
meal.
like double pounder of cheese. I think it would literally be 3.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, but that's all calories located in highly processed fats and salts, and it's so good. I love America. So yeah, when we look at, sure, we've got coal powering things in the cities, but what powers the human being? What powers the average working male? It was literally bread. And what a lot of people don't understand is, and this is the reason why this episode on the surface sounds so lackluster, is because all of us could right now take a 2-minute trip to the grocery store, and there's a giant wall of bread. Of what do you want? Gluten free? Do you want rye? Do you want sourdough? Do you want those 27 oat grain fiber bread that makes you explosive?
Ew.
Oh yeah.
Sourdough for me, please.
Yeah. I'm good with Hawaiian sweet bread.
Yeah, that's a good stuff too.
I tend to veer away from anything with too much fiber in it because it makes you unpredictable.
Yeah.
So yeah, like the reason why this is so lackluster is because we can go and we can pick up a loaf of bread for $1 or $2, and if you're really not even too worried about whether or not there's organic compounds in it that still classifies it as bread, you can spend less than $1. And so what I wanted to look at is how is something so trivial today became such a problem back in this time of change, the greatest change in England's history. So we're looking at 1830s to about the 1870s. The whole country was turned upside down with industrialization. What did this mean for bakers? What did this mean to how to power people? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the early days before the Industrial Revolution, and then we're kind of look at what happened during the Industrial Revolution, and how you'd be thinking that, okay, we've got all this fancy technology, we should be able to just slam out loaf after loaf after loaf and not think anything of it. But we're going to quickly see that the Industrial Revolution did nothing for bakers. In fact, it made things infinitely worse.
Okay.
So let's go back in the way back here. So when we look at the role of the village baker, so pre-industrial revolution, the village baker would be a member of a very elite and highly influential group of people, right? You would have your mayor, and then you would have like the doctor, whatever 19th century doctors look like. Yeah, that's probably another episode into itself. But you had your mayor, you have your doctor, you had your farmer. Oftentimes this could be a group of farmers, say like 4 or 5 farmers, and that would feed this entire village. And then you would also have your baker. And this was literally like the town council. And the baker had a lot of sway. Right, the baker would be the ones that would be going out to the farms and getting the grains, getting the wheat. They would help determine what the cost of the wheat would be, how much it would take to turn it into flour. The baker would also go out to the tavern, right? So the bar owner was another influential person, because he who controls the liquor was basically he who controlled the entertainment at the end of the day.
That's a fair assessment. Yeah.
Yeah. When there was no TV, let's get drunk. So, the bakers would go to taverns, and they would basically get the foam off of beers. And the reason being because that foam contained yeast.
I was going to say, I'd imagine that they would work together because the way you make beer and ale is using yeast.
Yes. Yeah. And you need leftover yeast. Again, not a very exciting topic when I can go to the grocery store and buy like 10 pounds of yeast for a couple of dollars. But in the 1800s, yeast was a very rare and very misunderstood organism. They didn't even know that it was an organism back then. They thought it was some magical powder or foam that made things bubbly, which is kind of true. I mean, it that's what it does.
It's cool.
Yeah. Anything that eats sugar and then farts out carbon dioxide is pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's you've aspired to something in society when you're peeing out alcohol and you're farting out CO2 and everybody wants to drink it. That's a little weird.
That's kind of gross. So bakers, high regard.
So the baker would be a part of the town council. And the bakers, they held these traditions of bread making that went back all the way to the medieval times. And yeah, they would have these family secrets on how to basically make white bread. And that was the one common thing that we're going to see throughout this whole entire episode, is that the whitest, bleachiest, most pasty bread was the most desired. Yep. Which is weird because, when times were hard, these bakers would rely on rye, barley, other types of grains like oatmeal, like non-glutinous stuff. They would, I'm doing air quotes, substitute flour in with these other grains. And that was to really show, like, hey, times suck. This is what we have to do. But it's funny because the barley, the rye, the grain breads are what is considered the most valuable today. But yeah, even the homeless beggars during this time demanded white, bleached, bland bread. Like that was what they required. So these bakers had these medieval recipes, medieval ways of making bread with like a brick oven. They would, unlike today where we can just flip a button and a couple of minutes, or ovens at 400 degrees. They would literally, these farmers, or not farmers, but these bakers would have to go out and they'll collect special pieces of wood of like a certain diameter, almost like twigs, and they would basically string them together. And for the lack of better terminology, they called them faggots.
It's in the dictionary. That's the legal term.
That or a cigarette. Like that was another name for a cigarette. So yeah, they engineered. They actually worked with the lumberjacks to get the right kind of sticks, the right kind of wood. They would have to spend usually a baker or the family. They would start pretty late in the day. Like they would start mixing things up. They would start getting, the first thing they do is light their oven on fire, and they would shove it full of these faggots, and then they would light it, and then they would heat up this oven. So then come right around 1-2 o'clock in the morning, they could start baking the bread. So they would scoop out all the ashes, and then they would start throwing in loaf after loaf after loaf. And so yeah, the bakers kind of they were a very integral part of society because they really did play. They had their hands in a lot of different things. And so yeah, everything from basically maintaining fire, waste management. They would tend to animals because they would need milk. Sometimes they would need fat. They would need eggs. These bakers literally had to go everywhere, and nothing went to waste. In fact, like when I think it was in 1840, there was a really bad year for wheat in England altogether, and it caused wheat to skyrocket. And so these bakers had to start finding substitutes, i.e. the barley, the rye, and these other grains. It was kind of frowned upon. Like if you went to a baker and all they had was like a 9-grain loaf of bread, back then you would be like, really, that's all you got? That's all you could put together? Where's my Wonder Bread? Where's, what is the whitest pasty stuff that you got that tastes like nothing? So yeah, back then these grains were highly frowned upon, really criticized. But then today, it's funny how it's
flipped.
Yeah, it's flipped. The other thing too that bakers would be responsible for is, other than making a whole bunch of bread, they would have to make a substance called cram. So this is where they would take these grains and they would mix it with, say, animal fat. They would use whatever wheat flour they had. Basically, it was whatever they could scrape off the floor. They would mix it with animal feed and make these little pellets that you would use to feed the chickens.
Okay.
Cool. So the bakers fed chickens. But when times were hard and bread became really expensive, the bakers would have to make this cram, it's a CRAM. They would make this cram and they would give it out to homeless people or families that were on hard times. And so that's what families would eat is chicken feed.
Is it like almost like hardtack, or is it a little bit different?
Yeah, it's actually I would say it's a little more nutritious than hardtack.
Okay.
So like where hardtack is just kind of like this basically that's just flour and water, right? Yeah. And then they would kind of bake it. No, this here would be like imagine going to the grocery store instead of buying like a 9-grain cracker where there's all these different types of grains on it or whatever. It's something that we would probably pay extra money for. Imagine crumpling that up, each one of those crackers into a tiny little ball, and mixing it with say like bacon fat or pig fat or whatever, and then baking it. That's what the families who fell on hard time, that's what they would have to eat, and they would be given that for free. But what was crazy is that
delicious.
Well, that's the thing. It was absolutely disgusting to their palate, but by today's standards, I would give it a whirl.
I would too. I'd try
it. Yeah, I mean, you put enough butter on anything, it's edible.
Exactly.
But yeah, so they would eat cram, and what's so ironic is that stuff is actually insanely healthy for you. It again, it just blows my mind how the times were different back then. But yeah, that's bakers in the 1830s, 1840s. That was kind of the role that they had. That was the part that they played. They would only have maybe 1 or 2 different recipes, right? They would have your standard issue loaf of bread, and they would generally make every night. They would make about 30 to 40 loaves of bread, and each loaf of bread weighed about 4 pounds. So that's a pretty gnarly chunk of bread, a 4-pound loaf.
That's hefty.
Yeah, it's like imagine like a giant spaghetti bowl or like a giant salad bowl. A 4-pound loaf would fit inside that. And so yeah, that's what they would make this every day for 6 and even sometimes 7 days a week, and it would be a really, really laborious task, right? They would buy a giant sack of flour that would weigh almost 100 pounds, and they would go through almost all of that in a night. And they had to mix the flour and the water. They had to mix all that by hand. They would, like I mentioned earlier, they would go to the taverns and they would skim the foam off of beer, and that's what they would mix in with the flour to create what's known as a starter. So the starter is basically flour with a little bit of water, and then they just throw whatever yeast they could get in there. And that yeast would break down the flour, and it would start to make sugars, or start eating the sugars, which is basically what flour is, and it would start breaking it down into proteins, CO2, which is what makes bread rise, and alcohol, which would get baked away. And so they would rely on this starter. So, for example, I think there was a baker in New York City. They have a sourdough starter in like this giant vat that goes all the way back to the 1700s.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, they just keep adding flour and water to it, and then they pull a little piece of that out to mix with their larger flour and water, and that's how they would make a loaf of sourdough bread, is with that sourdough starter.
Revolutionary bread.
Yeah, revolutionary bread. It wouldn't surprise me if George Washington had it at one point in time.
I have to look that place up.
Yeah, I remember seeing it back on PBS when I was a little kid. I'll have to go dig it up, because if I ever go to New York, I'm visiting that place. You can actually buy their starter.
That's really cool.
Yeah, you can actually buy it. They ship it out to you in like this little like 8-ounce package, and then you can make your own starter with it. And then it never really dies as long as you keep giving it flour and water. It will last forever, and it will get more sour and sour and sour. And the reason why you want it to be sour is because whenever you ferment something, i.e. put yeast with flour and water, you start the fermentation progress, and it will lower the pH. The process of making the CO2, making the alcohol, and making the gluten and all those proteins, in the process of doing that, you lower the pH. And not to bore you with all the chemistry here, but if you lower that pH below 4.5 on the pH scale, then it starts killing off all the bad bacteria. Gotcha. Essentially, it's like a self-preserving food source.
You're making kombucha bread.
Yeah, believe it or not, I'm actually making my own kombucha at home.
Nice.
Yeah. I gotta go mix it up here probably in the next week or so. I'll find out if it kills me. I'm sure at this point it's probably going to turn into just Everclear.
Well, just let us know how it goes.
Well, if the show is hosted by you from here on out, that's
now
we know why. Yeah.
So how much bread would like these average people eat for like their meal per day?
Yeah. So each household, each family would go through, let's see here, what did I put it? A family of 6 would go through 55 pounds of bread a week.
Holy bananas.
Yeah, totaling at 6,500 calories a day. When we look at, say, their breakfast was pretty simple. It's bread and butter. And literally, when they get done baking this bread, they would send their kids out, the bakers would send their kids out to go from household to household selling the bread. And so we're talking kids 8, 9, 10 years old out at 4 o'clock in the morning going from house to house selling bread that they just baked. And I bet that stuff smelled amazing.
I bet
the bread, not the kids. The bread probably smelled
definitely the bread.
Amazing. Definitely the bread, yeah. Because they were probably still warm. So if you look at breakfast, it was just bread and butter. And then a lot of times farmers wouldn't have a lunch, kind of like what we would have. They would actually instead have dinner. So this was their main course. So this would be bread, potatoes. If they would use potatoes to replace the bread, if the bread fell short for whatever reason, they may, for a whole household, have a few ounces of meat. The meat they would only have maybe 2-3 times a week, if even that. And it would be served with some sort of an ale, which is like a really weak beer. You're a beer expert, right, Kara? You know.
Not an expert, but I like beer.
Okay, what was it? Am I right? Is an ale like a weaker beer?
It's lighter. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say weaker.
Okay.
But it's lighter in taste.
Gotcha. Okay. So, what's funny is that they would have dinner, and then they would have supper, which is right before you went to bed. And then, so right before they would go to bed, they would have bread, more bread, butter, and a piece of cheese. I don't know how many of you have ever had like a piece of cheddar cheese or whatever and then taken a nap and then you wake up like an hour later with the worst breath known to mankind. Like, imagine going to bed and then waking up in the morning, kiss your wife goodbye, and you've got like this green cloud of cheese breath that just,
nice.
The 1800s of it all.
Yeah.
So yeah, they would that was basically each baker would make 2 types of bread. They would make house bread and then wheaten bread. So house bread was your standard white bread, right? That was the same thing that would make 40 loaves a day. Yeah, that's what they made. Wheaten bread was 30% more expensive. Reason being is because it would actually have sugar in it. They would have milk. It would have eggs. It would have a bit more wheat, so it would have a bit more gluten in it. And probably the most famous loaf or type of bread that was made, and it's still around to this day, is called the Coburg. And that was named after Queen Victoria's husband. Queen Victoria goes down as one of the most longest lasting, most influential monarchs in British history. And her husband was named Bread. So
I think that's something I appreciate about British monarchy is they like their queens. Their kings are problematic, but their queens are pretty dope.
Yeah. They've only had a couple of them, 3 of them. But yeah, there's something about the female monarchs that, and that's something I'd want to explore a little more, because I feel like these female monarchs, they had something to prove. They had something to say. They really had an uphill battle when we look at it from when we were talking about a largely misogynistic or masculine society. These women, they came out swinging. They knew exactly what they were doing.
There's a lot you can talk about there.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, let's jump forward a little bit, right? That right now we're talking a very idyllic setting. These bakers would be multi-generational, highly regarded members of society. They really played a huge part. Something that in today's society we don't even recognize. Like now we think of a baker and it's a very niche thing. It's a very, I don't want to say elitist, but it's a very much like, why would I want to spend $9 on a loaf of bread when I can just go grab a loaf of Wonder Bread and do the same exact thing, right?
Yeah.
We don't put the same stock in the necessity of a baker. But when we look at England, or we look at London, right? 1860s, 1870s. Coal was king, right? Coal was powering, was using steam. It was powering all the machines. It powered factories. It would make it so that you could actually almost replace the blacksmith, because you could use these giant steam engines to make steam hammers that could now forge steel. It would do, you could have everything from machines that could sew, you would have machines that could forge, you could have machines that could pretty much do anything. The issue was that instead of workers being paid upon what they produced, as in like, hey, you made X amount of pounds of corn or wheat, or hey, you produced all the town's pigs for the fall season, or whatever. Workers were paid by the piece. So your day was broken down to just a few pennies. Today we look at rent, we look at mortgage, right? We tend to pay a month at a time. To families lower class in London working in these factories, they would have to pay rent daily. And we're talking, they would make, say, 5 pennies the entire day. 3 pennies of it would have to go to just paying their room and board for that night, and they would have 2 pennies left over to feed their families. I mean, if we fast forward to the 1880s, when we look at, say, Jack the Ripper, the canonical 5 that Jack the Ripper killed, most of them, actually all of them, were sex workers, and they were having to work their profession daily just to get a couple of cents lined up so they would have a place to sleep that night. If not, they were kicked out and told to go back to work on the streets until they had the money.
Pretty much. I think 1 or 2 of them had like kind souls in Whitechapel, let them stay, and then they would like go out and get murdered. But
yep. Yeah. And even in still, like, even the landlords back then, and we're going to get to that here in a minute, the landlords had to rely on the property to really make a huge profit. And this is where the bakers come back. The bakers from the villages would, because everybody in the villages, like, all your farmers picked up and left and went to the cities. Well, crap. Where do you get your food from? Where do you get your main ingredients from? Everybody would pack up and they would go into London. And so eventually the bakers had to do the same thing. Now, here is the issue. The demand for bakers was high. The demand for bread each day was even higher. Your typical baker may make 40 loaves of bread in the course of a night for the following day. When we are getting into London, where, like I said before, 2/3 of the population of England all lived in London, instead of making 40 loaves of bread a day, these bakers had to go to like 120 to 150 loaves a day. And yeah, and by the way, this is what made it really rough, was that even though everything modernized in terms of manufacturing, the process for making the bread remained exactly the same as it did in the 1840s, and remained exactly the same going all the way back to medieval times. It was you creating your starter. You would have these giant troughs. They're almost like horse troughs that would now hold 2 giant sacks of flour. They would have to mix all this by hand. If you imagine trying to mix 150 pounds of flour, you got to add the water into it. So that makes it even heavier. And you have to mix all this by hand. It is I heard it was equated to like mixing concrete by hand. And
Oh, that's so much work.
yeah, these bakers, they would come into the cities, and it's not like every household had a giant oven. These bakers came into the cities, and the only thing they could do was basically sell themselves out. They were bakers, went from being a highly regarded member of society to being nothing more than a laborer. They were considered uneducated. They were considered unskilled. They were like the bottom rungs. Instead of in the countryside where your bakery was had multiple open windows with airflow, your oven was powered by wood. These bakers had to work in basements with no windows. So if you think about that oven, they had to crank that thing up to 400, 500 degrees. They powered it with nothing but coal. So the whole inside of the oven, once that coal burned up, they would have to scoop it out, and it was just pounds of black soot. And that black soot would make its way onto the bread. So the loaves of bread that they were producing were actually black. They weren't burnt. It was black because it was basically nothing but carcinogens. Here is where the dumpster fire begins, because we now have all the ingredients. We have all the bags of metaphorical trash and rubbish and everything being thrown into the dumpster. We just got to light this thing on fire, and this is what happened. So,
all right, light the match and throw it.
Yeah, here we go. So the demand was high for bread, or is actually higher than the demand for bakers, which was already pretty high. Bakers were considered bottom rung of society, so they really didn't have any say in the working conditions. These bakers would have to go work in basements with no airflow. Well, what happens if you light a giant fire and there's no airflow? Go through all the oxygen. So one of the major causes of death for a baker in this time period was basically asphyxiation. There was no airflow, and when you heat that oven up to 400 or 500 degrees, you would run into the issue of heat. Like these basement bakeries, if you can even call them that, these basement bakeries would get in excess of 120 to 130 degrees.
Well, you said there's no windows either, right? So
yeah,
you have smoke at the same time, so that fire is taking all the oxygen, plus the smoke in the room, plus the excess coal. Of course, you're gonna basically suffocate in that kind of environment.
Yeah, not to mention too, if you look at the bread, everything that was in that bread by today's standards, it would be unedible.
You're getting a D on that health check.
Yeah, if even that. I think it's probably get shut down because coal, when you burn coal, like I mentioned in the nuclear fusion episode, like when you burn coal, yeah, it releases carbon monoxide and all that kind of stuff. But there's dozens of other things, other highly toxic, cancer-causing compounds that come out of burning coal. So unless you can really feed a very precise amount of oxygen to it and keep it at a certain temperature, it's going to burn dirty, and it's just going to release this black soot everywhere. And a lot of times these bakers were indiscernible from coal miners.
Wow.
So yeah, here, like instead of doing a 100-pound sack of flour, they had to do 200 pounds. They were now making over 100 loaves a day. So each loaf was about 4 pounds. They did keep that consistent. The bakers would have to work 6 days straight, but instead of coming in towards the evening and making or starting the process, they were coming in shortly after lunch. Now, thankfully, bakers were given a half day on Sunday because, God and stuff.
Right. Victorian times.
Yeah. The other thing that's really fascinating is that they actually had labor laws at this time. In the 1870s, they had labor laws for how many hours a ship worker can work, for a factory worker, a tailor. They had really mandates on how many hours or days that your average worker could work. Yeah, which is kind of interesting. They actually had that. But bakers were exempt from that. Bakers could work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
Jeez.
Yeah, there was absolutely no protection in that regard. So each loaf of bread that they would make cost 8 pence. So that was a third of your daily worker's salary. So imagine working all day and having to spend a couple $100s on a loaf of bread, depending on what your daily salary is. But yeah, it would be anywhere from $30 to a couple $100 just for a loaf of bread. So they would have to work 3 to 4 hours each day just to buy that loaf of bread. And meanwhile, that baker, instead of like, okay, so your average worker had to spend 3 to 4 hours to buy that loaf of bread, your average baker would have to work 10 plus hours of manual labor to make that loaf. You can kind of see there's a disparity there, right? Like, why is it that, the worker only needs 3 to 4 hours to buy a loaf of bread, but the baker now has to spend at least half the day to make it. So from there, it actually gets worse. So you look at like the larger bake shops. The large bake shops, they actually had foremans, and they would have dozens, if not hundreds, of bakers there. They were just slamming out loaf after loaf after loaf. That's actually kind of what decredited or devalued the bakers, because like, why anybody can do this? Like, why do we need specially trained people? Whenever that happens, whenever you have an unskilled or considered an unskilled labor force and leadership, that leadership or the foremans are going to make a lot more money than the rest of the crew. The higher ups are going to make way more money than what the ground level people are. And so what does that mean? Longer hours, if we in worse work conditions. So if you look at the average lifespan of your Londoner, it could have been, depending on what they were doing, it could have been 50, 55 years old. Your average baker lived for 42 years, and that was a good lifespan. So not only breathing in all this coal dust and everything like that, because they were in basements with no windows, they would have to inhale all that smoke. But there is one other thing too: flour. When you breathe in all that flour, what happens is it dries out your lungs. It dries out your airways, and that's where people were actually getting lung disease just by making bread. And one side note, have you ever heard of the term a journeyman?
I have.
Okay, what is a journeyman?
Well, it's 8:40 on a Wednesday night, and I can't give you an awesome definition of it.
So every trade has a ranking system. A journeyman has always been considered the highest level. If you're a journeyman carpenter, a journeyman tool and die maker, a journeyman car mechanic, you are considered at the very pinnacle of your profession.
So you're a pro.
Yeah, you're a pro and then some.
All right.
And where the term journeyman comes from is because in everybody moving into the cities, these bread makers would coming from the countryside, and they would have to go from baker to or bakery to bakery to bakery trying to find work to do. They had no idea what they were getting themselves into. They had no idea what kind of equipment they were going to have, what kind of oven they had. And so they would have to show up almost on a daily basis to a different bakery and hope to God they had everything necessary. And if they didn't, the journeyman would have to really call upon every ounce of his skills to make it work. And that's where the term journeyman comes from, is these bakers would have to be very creative. They would have to know everything about bread making. They would have to know so much more than your average factory worker, that they would later be considered the pinnacle of their profession, right? Because the more you know, the more creative you can be to go through one situation to the next. And so that's where we get the term journeyman, is because they were traveling experts, so to speak.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so when we look at kind of diving back to the health concerns a little bit, you had the coal dust, you had the flour dust breathing in.
Right.
One study showed that out of 111 bakers, 108 of them had lung disease.
Good Lord.
So The dust would accumulate in the airways and dry out the throat and esophagus. Flour dust can also be explosive. So if you have flour dust in the right concentration and a lit piece of coal was sitting nearby, kablooey. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, goodness.
Yeah.
I didn't think that would be possible.
Yeah, and that's why, like, when I was diving into this, I'm like, holy cow, this was way worse than I thought. So the other things too is you're dealing with yeast. I hate to get a little gross here, a little trigger warning. Every human being has yeast growing on them, right? Yeast likes warm areas, moist areas. It really can, it's very versatile. It can grow anywhere. So if you look at, say, your typical jock itch or yeast infection, that's caused by a yeast. And these bakers working in these conditions, like if you would see their skin, like their arms and everything would look like they were covered in bed bug bites, but it was actually like yeast sores growing all over the body. And when you throw in most of these bakers and most of the workers were living, like, so you could have a family of 5 or 6 living in a 12-foot by 12-foot flat. Most of these flats didn't have any windows. They were death traps if they caught on fire. So that's also including the bed bugs, lice, rats, mice, cockroaches. Pretty much, I'll be honest with you, all those things would kill me today. If I were to be teleported back into that time, I would be dead by the end of the day.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm good.
Yeah. So
I have newfound respect for Victorian-era people living in poor conditions.
We haven't even got to the adulterants yet. So one of the big things they were always trying to figure out was, how do you make bread rise? So it later came out, Louis Pasteur discovered that, yeast is a living organism, like a germ. And germs cause sickness. So, oh my gosh, we can't have yeast in our bread. So what they did is, this is where we start getting into chemistry here. There's a company called the Aerated Bread Company, and they would mix flour and water and a pressure vessel, and then they would inject CO2. So whenever you ferment something with yeast, that yeast is what makes the CO2, and that's what makes the bread rise. Well, the yeast also breaks down the sugars in the flour to make proteins, and that's what makes, bread, sticky, or the dough sticky.
Right.
So what the Aerated Bread Company did is, like, we want the whitest, purest, most blandest loaf of bread known to mankind. So they would mix this dough up with high concentrations of CO2, and then they would eject it, or they would open up the pressure valve and just let all this air in. So the CO2 has to go somewhere, and then it would instantly expand the bread, and they would quickly throw it into an oven.
Oh.
And in theory, it worked.
Right.
It makes bread, but it's not edible. I mean, it is edible. It is bread. It kind of tastes like bread, but it's like cardboard. So, but people loved it. They thought this was the greatest thing next to sliced bread, which is coming later. So there's a lot of chemistry and a lot of stuff going on here, but it's just hilarious to think that, hey, bland is better. And let's get rid of yeast because yeast is going to make you sick. When in reality, yeast is the thing that actually makes a real loaf of bread taste good. It's going to come to a pinnacle here with adulterants. When the cost of flour goes up, right? When your main ingredient starts going up, and the cost or the value of your product plummets because there were these giant factories that were making hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of loaves of bread a day, like that Aerated Bread Company, that lowers the cost or the value of the bread. So what do? Well, you got to start, like, especially the smaller bakers, medium to smaller ones, you got to start cutting costs. To me, this is like the worst part of this. This is like the height of the dumpster fire. The first adulterant that they used, because again, white, pasty, bland bread was all the craze. Even the homeless people wanted it. So what they did was they would supplement 10% of their flour, because that was the most expensive thing that expensive variable. They would replace 10% of that flour with chalk.
Ew.
Like, go into a classroom, grab a stick of chalk, and pound it, grind it up to a powder, and then use that. And so, like, if you ever taste bread with 10% chalk in it, it's gritty.
Yeah.
I mean, it would taste as well as one would expect a chalk flavored bread would taste like.
Yeah, that
So,
sounds delicious.
yeah, but people loved it because the bread was so much whiter.
That's so weird.
I know it is. It is so weird. The other thing that was to me that was really insane. So here we are in the 1870s. They would use a substance called alum. It is really potassium aluminum sulfate. So it's a type of a salt. It's a salt that you really don't want anywhere in your body, even though you have to have potassium and you do have to have sulfates and trace amount of aluminum. When it's a salt like this, chemically it can do some really weird things to your brain. But they would supplement their flour with alum because what it did is it made the flour absorb more water. When you would go door to door selling your loaves of bread, you would actually have to, by law, London law, you'd have to bring a scale along, and you would have to stand in front of the household contact and you would have to weigh out this loaf of bread to make sure that it was at least 4 pounds. But if you think about it, if the bread could absorb more water, that means the weight of the bread is from the water, not from the flour.
Right.
You would be saving a lot of money that way. So yeah, it allows the bread to take on more water. So it's kind of a dough enhancer. And every loaf of bread had at some point in time alum in it. It was literally used everywhere. If you have enough of it, it does pile up in your brain and it starts causing brain damage. But, got to have that white bread.
Yeah, that's the most important thing at this point.
Yeah, priorities, right? And it's so interesting is it's like the chemistry at this time was starting to come around, and the chemistry was making some really, really famous advancements, but it was also causing things in terms of long-term issues that we weren't going to be aware of until decades from this time period.
Right.
And by that time, the damage has already been done. There was boracic acid. So boracic acid was used in milk. It was designed to purify milk. So the idea is like they didn't really have pasteurization, kind of like what we have today. So you'd use boracic acid in there, and it would kill off the bacteria and everything. But it would also cause nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, chronic diarrhea. Many dairies would eventually do away with it, primarily because of bovine tuberculosis was rampant.
Yeah.
And this is a crazy thing. This went on for a number of years. And from the 1870s to 1880s, 500,000 children died from the use of boracic acid. And we haven't even got to the shady millers. So the big companies or the big producers would do things like the millers would adulterate their flour before even selling it to a baker. And then the baker would adulterate it even more. So you could be buying a 100-pound bag of flour, 10% of it could already be chalk, another 10% could already be alum. And then you're thinking you're getting pure flour, so you bring it back to your bakery and you're like, cool, let's take out 20 pounds and let's add even more chalk and more alum into it. This would create even more problems and health concerns. So we're talking like a major cause of death in London was stemming from eating bread.
What a time to be alive.
A great time to be alive. And I know on the surface it's like, wow, an episode on bread. But when you look at all this background information and what really happened in the shift, yeah, it's kind of a dumpster fire.
Yeah, just a bit. I mean, you're just trying to feed your people, but...
Yeah, like you have this grand idea of the Industrial Revolution revolutionizing all of humanity. As a result, the other main fuel source that actually makes the factory workers work was poisoning them, right? And this was, and we also have people that were addicted to arsenic. You had people that would use lead oxide. So that's the stuff that used to make white paint white. but they would mix that in with bread. Yeah, arsenic, the lead. You would have like small traces of cyanide. They would have mercury, all sorts of stuff. And so, what fixed it? Like, obviously, London is still here today. What fixed it? Was it some giant government overhaul? Was it a bunch of workers that got together and said, hey, singing Twisted Sisters, we're not going to take it? Was it a group of people that came together? No. And here's the thing about capitalism. And if you look at British history and American history, there's one fundamental rule. Nothing happens in this country or in a capitalist society. I'm not dogging on capitalism, but there is a side effect that you should always be aware of when studying history. Nothing ever happens in history unless there's money to be had from it. So unless there is a way to get rid of those adulterants and make the bread cheaper, those adulterants will always remain in there. Well, here comes America. 1880s. America was coming out of its agricultural stage, and it was starting to see the beginnings of industrialization. But America had a lot more land and a lot more resources, so that when they did industrialize, things were spread out in a way where the technology could disseminate more freely. The Americans also looked at things a little differently. The big advancement was American flour. So American flour, it was clean. It was very inexpensive. It was a good quality. And it also had like an extra 5 to 7% more gluten in it. Gluten is what makes bread, technically bread, right? It's a really sticky substance. It what makes a bread stick together when you pull it out of the oven. And America is like, yeah, we got tons of this stuff. Hey, England, do you want it? Pennies to the dollar. Okay. So by the 1890s, over 90% of the bakers were using 90% imported flour. The adulterants went away because America made it cheaper to go without the adulterants.
Okay.
And so like the flour was so cheap that but it was cheaper than the actual adulterants themselves. So, like, why would I want to put more crap in my flour? It's just cheaper to just go buy the American stuff, and it's better anyways.
Yeah.
Sugar. So, the same thing with flour. America was selling sugar at cheap prices, and this enabled bakers to expand their wares like rolls and pastries. America also came up with the idea of using bread tins. So, you know how a loaf of bread today is a rectangular prism type of shape?
Right.
Before, they were round. Well, if you are sticking a whole bunch of loaves in an oven that are all circles, you're losing like 30 to 40% of the volume of your oven to just the space in between each round loaf of bread.
Yeah, yeah.
So what the tins did is they made all the breads uniform in size, so they didn't have to worry about measuring stuff. And then they could stack in, instead of, say, like 20 or 30 loaves of bread, they could stack in like 100 all in one go. And so the bread tins also prevented the coal from piling up in the on the breadsticks. They still had to use coal, but it really reduced the size or the surface area that would come in contact with the coal. So that made it all the more safer. But then also too, the Americans came out and they're like, "Why are you guys mixing all this by hand? You have steam engines, you have steam machines that can spin around in circles, all right? They produce a wheel that spins in circles. Why not just put a hook on the end of it, like a giant iron hook, and mix your flour, water, and yeast in these giant vats? And why not rely on that hook, it's called a dough hook, to spin around in circles and mix it up for you?" And suddenly they're like, whoa, wait, that's actually a thing? And so, whereas the machines at that, the 1860s, 1870s would cost more than like the value of the small baker, 10 times over, Americans are coming in with technology that it was faster, stronger, easier to use, and it became more accessible. And then probably the really, really big thing was electricity, right? Electricity and gas.
Yeah.
And so when we start getting into 1890s to 1900s, bakers changed. They completely changed from being like the main source of calories in England. They changed more into restaurants. They changed into delis. They were now making cakes. They could make pastries. They could make desserts. They can make sandwiches.
Yeah. So kind of like what you think of today when you think of a bakery.
Yeah, yeah. And instead of having like 2 or 3 recipes, they could have 10 or 15. And suddenly too, when we start looking at transportation, French bakers could go to England and be like, "Here's what we do." And then the big one was Germans. A lot of Germans went into England in the early 1900s, and they brought with them a lot of their ingredients, like the rye and stuff like that. And then also too the idea of taking 2 pieces of bread, turning them into slices, and then you would take like cured beef tongue or like boiled bone marrow, and you would spread that on your sandwich, and that's what they had for sandwiches back then.
Those Germans.
Yeah, those crafty Germans making their weird
making
bone
their
marrow
sandwiches.
Spreads. Yeah. Yep.
Nice.
Which is funny too, because if you also go into England nowadays, if you go into London, there's a lot of bakers there, or bakeries that have German names.
Okay.
And they've been there ever since. So yeah, this was a heaping dumpster fire, and it killed a lot of people, and it made a lot of people sick. But the solution to it was really interesting. It had more to do with capitalism, and it kind of makes you think like, hey, let's take a problem that the world has experienced today, like global warming, right? The consensus is that there's too many hydrocarbons in the atmosphere, or burning hydrocarbons has put too much in the atmosphere. So global warming will always persist, the same way that the adulterants always persisted in bread making. The global warming won't ever go away until someone finds a way to, one, make it more profitable not to use hydrocarbons, or two, make it extremely profitable to process the carbon in the atmosphere and make something useful out of it.
That makes sense.
And so, like, when we look at the whole bread making dumpster fire, and you look at the solution towards that mindset has got to be something that will have to go into effect today in order to solve these global problems that we're having now. So if anybody out there can make a loaf of bread and reduce global warming at the same time, there's probably a Nobel Prize in there for you.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. You got this. We're rooting for you.
Yeah, we're hoping, because I certainly haven't got it figured out. My bread machine, I'm still going to keep using my little bread machine to make my loaves, and we'll let global warming fall on more capable younger minds. So yeah, that is what I chose to do instead of talking about politics and getting our butt sued. If there's any listeners left at the end of this episode, thank you.
I mean, I thought it was pretty interesting.
I had to give it my all. It's that prime content out there that
solid.
Solid. Well, we'll see. Who knows? Maybe it'll be our most listened episode ever.
Yeah, you never know until we hit dysentery.
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, there's always dysentery. In fact, do you want to give us a little snapshot of what it is that you have coming up, and then I'll give a little snapshot of what I have coming up?
Yeah, all right. So I, for the past week or so, have been doing extensive research on the Oregon Trail. I started my research with playing the game, naturally. So I killed my entire family the first time around because all I wanted to do was shoot buffalo like a 5-year-old. And then I played it like an adult, and I survived. But then actually I am now going into the events that led up to the cause of the migration west, and that is a very political, not today's politics, but political for the 1800s.
Yeah,
and
a lot of divided interests.
Yeah, it ties into slavery. It ties into migrations west for gold. It ties into religion. It ties into absolutely everything. So it's going to be quite a doozy. So that's why I'm throwing out dysentery jokes, just because I've been playing the game a lot.
And if anybody out there who remembers playing this in elementary school and those old Mac machines, and yeah, everybody remembers like just starting the game and just buying a whole bunch of ammo, no clothing, no food,
Yeah.
nothing, just a rifle and a whole bunch of bullets, and then you would just do that little arcade style buffalo shoot 'em up game where the buffalo would run along and then.
Yeah, and then they'd change directions on you, and,
Oh yeah,
and then they change
crafty
again.
buffalo.
And you're like, oh.
Sometimes there'd be like a couple dead rabbits out there too.
Yeah, every once in a while, and your bullets are absolutely really slow. So
Yeah.
they're not really bullets; they're more like ping pong balls being shot out of a Nerf gun. It's like, pew.
Actually, I was thinking they're more like just pixels. They're like a square.
Well, yeah, they
Square
weren't.
bullet.
Yeah, they're not very aerodynamic.
No, and you could walk away from those things.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about dudes named Jebediah and Narcissa, and we're gonna talk about a lot of fun things that are actually very serious, but also some of it is laughable.
Yeah,
Just because it is, man.
Anybody with the name Jebediah is going to add a certain panache to the story.
Yeah, exactly. And poor Jebediah thought he was doing right with his fur trade, and then he got killed.
Well, and that's the thing is when we look at this expansion west, right? Politicians, they thought they'd engineered out a logical, organized way of civilizing the West. And I'm using civilized very loosely because the definition of civilizing was killing a lot of Native Americans. And whenever you start like the whole theme of the show, they tried to map all this stuff out, engineer it, they tried to do things in phases. And as soon as that first wagon chain sent out, it just fell apart.
Oh, it fell apart over and over and over and over again. It was literally a dumpster fire after dumpster fire after dumpster fire, and every single dumpster fire carved the literal trail.
Yeah. We're talking mountains of dead buffalo.
Mountains of dead buffalo, a lot of disease, and
cholera.
Yeah,
dysentery,
scurvy.
We
have some accidents where people were ran over by animals, people drowned, people were hit by lightning in some cases. It's a mess. It's going to be a very fun and interesting topic. I have primary resources up the wazoo, so it's going to be fun. What do you got going on?
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of lead into that a little bit. So I'm working on a Thanksgiving Day special where we look at the story or the highly romanticized legend of Thanksgiving. And I'm gonna do it. So it's going to be a special episode the week of Thanksgiving. So we're actually going to be releasing 2 episodes that week. So we're going to be releasing something about the story of Thanksgiving, what happened, and why a lot of Native Americans consider that Thanksgiving as a very sad moment in their culture. There's no way I can do that topic justice of how basically white men have basically screwed over Native Americans for hundreds of years. My plan is to get a Native American professor on the show to kind of just have a whole episode just dedicated to that. But what I want to do is I want to look at the story of the Pilgrims of William Bradford and kind of compare their little group of Puritans versus, say, like John Smith and the British military expeditions further south in Virginia. I want to look at how they thought they were going to come over to America and have this way better existence. And then they quickly discovered that America was going to do everything in its power to kill them. And those that survived kind of came on, the societies that did survive became the major cities. And we're going to look at the original story between Samoset and William Bradford and that first Thanksgiving, and then kind of give you a little taste of what happened afterwards, after that successful year, with the whole Mayflower Compact and everything. And then after that, it all went downhill. So we've got that special episode coming up. And then I'm also going to be doing an episode on Lewis and Clark. When Kara and I started out this little adventure of creating a podcast, the first thing that kind of came into my mind was Lewis and Clark venturing off into this completely uncharted territory. Ever since like the instant we started Googling how to make a podcast, it went sideways. Everything known to mankind could possibly get in the way of creating the podcast. And I think it's very synonymous with Lewis and Clark. They were given this giant chunk of land and they were told to go explore it. The path that they took eventually would become the Oregon Trail, or at least large parts of it. And the stuff that they got involved with and the craziness and just the wild and wacky things that they had to deal with really preceded the Oregon Trail as we know it. So yeah, we got a lot coming up here. We've got this episode. We've got the actual story of Thanksgiving. We've got Lewis and Clark. And then we were going to have a multi-part series on the Oregon Trail, ranging from the early 1990s retro game to the legacy of Jebediah.
Jebediah shows up maybe a quarter of the way through, so I'm sure you'll hear him in the second episode, and then he's going to disappear after like 5 minutes.
Yeah, he's going to disappear because, 1800s and everybody dies in the 1800s.
Everybody.
In fact, as far as I know, everybody in my life that was born in the 1800s died.
You have people in your life who was born in the 1800s?
Not anymore. But when I was a kid, I knew people who fought in World War I. Yeah, they were born in the 1800s, like the 1890s.
Fair. That's fair.
So, and a lot of those people who fought in World War I knew people who fought in the Civil War.
That's
and
great.
The people who fought in the Civil War knew people who fought in the Revolutionary War.
That's true. Facts, actually. We can...
Yeah. When you grow up in a retirement community, you meet a lot of history.
In a good way, man.
Yeah.
Talk to old people. And
yes.
Anybody who's listening, talk to your local old people. They have some wonderful stories to tell.
Go to a retirement
home.
community that's open to the public.
Chat.
Oftentimes you can sign up to just go in and visit people. Go talk to them, especially if you're like a teenager and you've got a lot going on in your life that's really confusing. Go talk to an old person. Sure, Twitter didn't exist, Facebook, Instagram, all this stuff didn't exist, but I guarantee you that old people have dealt with the stuff that you're dealing with and they know exactly how to get through it.
Oh yeah. Either that or they have a story where it makes your problems seem a lot smaller.
Yeah, they take your mind off of a lot of things like, oh, I guess I can go buy a loaf of bread.
It's not going to kill me?
No. Yeah, no, none of that alum. It's alum-free bread, not gluten-free. It's guaranteed not to cause brain damage.
Perfect. But yeah, that's our message of the day. Go talk to an old person. And truly, especially if you're younger, they would love your company and they'll talk to you.
And then if you go talk to old people and you hear about old people dumpster fires,
let us know. Yeah, write in, let us know. We'd love to hear the dumpster fires that they bestowed upon you.
But yeah, that's our show. Stay tuned for some good content coming up here. Yeah, until then, keep it a hot mess.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.